All right.
Hello, Matthew.
I was thinking about cars today, and there was some lacrosse stuff next to the car. I just saw. It's like this is what's her season, right? This is the time she's swimming. And how's she going?
She's doing okay. She's still not. She's in COVID isolation.
She got it.
COVID. So
Is this her first time?
second time.
Again. So bad.
All righty. It is 5 p.m. I'm going to call to order the January 26th meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission. It's good to see everybody here. First item of business will be to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Next, we're going to approve the minutes from December 8th and January 12th. I just comment that last meeting, we tried to approve the minutes for December 8th, but we did not have a quorum. So we voted, that was just a practice run. This is the real run, right? Yes. Okay, good. So this is the live version of approving those minutes. So we're gonna, do we do them individually or fell swoop?
Individually.
All right, we'll do them individually. So all of the minutes from the past two meetings are in current packet. So we'll, anybody have any comments on December 8th before they make a motion?
Move to approve the December 8th minutes as presented.
All right,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. That's official now. Put that one to rest. Now let's look at the minutes for January 12th.
And I wasn't here for that meeting, but I will vote. I listened to the tape and the minutes match up with the tape.
Second, I test
All right,
I move to approve the minutes as for January 12th as presented.
Second.
great. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you very much. All right, next item will be citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Seeing nobody moving to the front, we'll close citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda and move directly into new business. We have several items in new business and we'll start in order. Item A is Entrance Corridor Certificate of Appropriateness 2023-01, an application by Charles Potter for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for exterior improvements and new signage for the Cattleman's Market located at 534 East Nelson Street, owned by TrueNet LLC.
We have two applications for the parcel at 534 East Nelson Street. One's a site plan and one's an entrance corridor, and you have to do the entrance corridor first. So we're starting there, as you pointed out. This is the request in the entrance corridor for the installation of an exterior fenced enclosure and new signs for the Cattleman's Market at, again, the 534 East Nelson Street address. Some of this may be a little bit hard to see. I only have one of these, but if it's a little bit easier to see on a larger scale, might pass that around.
Is this in our packet, Arnie?
It is, but it's obviously in the small size towards the back in the application materials. The proposal is for a 28-foot 8-inch by 18-inch raised concrete pad for a walk-in cooler, a walk-in freezer, and a smoker to be enclosed with a 12-foot high solid wood fence painted to match the color of the building. On that pad, again, it would be the walk-in cooler and walk-in freezer and the smoker. The reason for the 12-foot high fence is apparently the walk-in cooler and the walk-in freezer are both 12 feet in height. And for screening requirements, those have to be screened, and therefore the fence is proposed to be 12 feet high, which is a good bit taller than what you're normally used to seeing fences at property lines, which are limited to 7 feet, but this is actually a screening element. So therefore it is proposed to be 12 feet in height. Fence enclosure will be located at the northeast end of the parking lot as shown on the aerial photograph on the bottom of page 1 of your staff report. And it's the area sort of outlined a little bit in yellow with that yellow star. Applicant proposes installing an existing 36 square foot painted sign above the awning on the Nelson Street facade, a painted sign above the window area on the east side of the building, and replacing the check into cash monument sign panel on the existing Cattleman's Monument sign with an existing Cattleman's Monument sign panel. Photographs of the existing signs and the proposed locations are included with the application materials. On page 2, the upper photograph, the sign is proposed for that area on the wall above the awning there. The second photograph shows the side of the building where the proposed enclosure is to be located. And that pad, that concrete pad that we talked about a minute ago, has already been poured, and you see that still framed up there towards the right-hand side of that photograph. I'm not going to bore you with the details for all the sign regulations, but on page 4, we do have the requirements for entrance corridors. So subsection B there for signage, you have 3 items. For architecture, you have 6 standards, and for site planning, you have 6 standards. So those are what you should utilize for your criteria for the review and potential approval of this entrance corridor request. Staff will say that the proposed improvements do meet the zoning criteria, and happy to answer any questions.
So we're talking here about the sign and the fence, correct? The site plan comes later
Correct.
and the second, okay. Clarify.
So any questions I have about the Public Works has posed, I'm going to wait till the next one.
I will go ahead and answer that now because yeah, that's correct. Sorry, that's Public
Sorry,
Works
should
comment
wait.
is in the
I
site
should
plan.
wait.
I take that back. Correct. So we're really looking at more of the aesthetic items in the entrance corridor.
I'm assuming, or I shouldn't necessarily assume, but will the Cattleman's sign cover the scratched out former loan?
I do not know the size of that, and I can only presume that if it doesn't, that some of that would be painted to pretty up whatever doesn't get, but that's a presumption, and maybe the applicant can answer that.
Okay.
It's their turn.
No more questions for Arnie. We can go to applicant statement.
Russell Worson and Jay Melvin is the owner of the building, and he's here, and Chaz Potter's here with us also. I don't think I really have anything to add from what Arnie said, except for they're redoing that face before we put the sign up. They're completely redoing that face of the building. But I think Arnie made it pretty clear, and if you have any questions, glad to answer them.
Is this a second location or a moving location, moving from the other Nelson Street or
It's
Midland?
the county's loss really, but it certainly is the city's gain, and it's a better location for that facility, and it's much better access to the facility. And it's just a good spot for that.
Can I ask about just looking at the side of the building, how high is 12 feet on, how high will that go up in that building? Like, I know what 12 feet is in inches, but how high is
On the front of the building or the
or
side?
the side, the fence on the side that will be around the roof? How high is the
Yeah,
frame of
The roof line, how much?
yeah, like what's the roof line,
don't know the answer to
Okay.
that.
All right. I mean, I can answer because the
12
doors,
feet is caused by the size of the equipment.
Yeah,
that
and you
we
wanna
have to
cover it.
screen.
right? Okay. Will there be there's no signage or anything on that fence, right? That's just be painted the
Correct.
color that,
It'll be a cream or tan like
matches
the
the
building
building.
is.
Mhm.
Right.
okay.
Great. Any more questions for Russ? All right. Thank you, Russ. Public comment on the first item of business. None? Okay. Commission discussion and decision.
Well, let's make it simple. I move to approve entrance quarter certificate of appropriateness application EC 2023-01 for exterior improvements and signage at 534 East Nelson Street as proposed by the applicant.
Second,
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Now, we'll move to site plan, item B, site plan 2023-01, an application by Charles Potter requesting approval of a site plan that includes an exterior fenced-in area for a walk-in cooler, walk-in freezer, and a smoker for 534 East Nelson Street.
Site plans cannot be issued or I should say, building permits can't be issued until a site plan is approved. And this site plan is requesting approval for exterior fenced in area for walk-in cooler, walk-in freezer, and smoker, as previously mentioned. And again, this is required prior to the issuance of a building permit. The proposals for a 28-foot and 8-inch by 18-inch raised concrete pad for the walk-in cooler, freezer, and smoker, and being enclosed by a 12-foot high solid wood fence painted to match the color of the building. The fence enclosure will be located northeast end of the upper parking lot as shown on the aerial photograph below, and as was shown on the previous application. You see the proposed site plan there on page 2, which is the larger version that was passed around in the previous application. Again, not going to bore you with the details because they're all written there as far as requirements for yard setbacks, requirements for parking, and the comments that we received from Public Works, building official, fire protection, and police. In particular, Public Works comment says, had a question about the condensate. So condensate from the refrigeration lines and units should be disposed in an area or in a way that doesn't go into the street or cause problems in alleyways. And we can, perhaps there's a better understanding now where that condensate might go, but there's plenty of room on this property for the condensate to be disposed of, in my opinion, without having to interrupt any sort of alleyway or street. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for this particular project, but the applicant can answer more specific questions if you have them about where the condensate from these units will be pumped.
Yeah, I could see the only, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, does it go out onto the asphalt? Does it, in the winter, does it become ice? That's kind of the simple question, I would say.
Then additionally, on the middle of page 3 of your report, those are the criteria. So the site plan shall be approved by the planning commission if it's found to be adequate with respect to those 8 items. Staff does find that the requirements, that all the zoning requirements pertaining to the site design and use have been met.
So,
Happy to answer any questions.
so Public Works came back with a comment saying that we have to figure out how to appropriately dispose of the condensate. Building fish, fire protection, police, no comments. Those are criteria that, I mean, we can approve the site plan without those boxes being checked, because you're gonna have to check those boxes before the building permit happens. Is that what
Right.
happens?
I would say since they had no comments, they were given the opportunity to
Oh,
review.
so they were- okay.
have no comments, so all their boxes are checked.
Okay, so they're, okay. So what are we supposed to do with the comment from Public Works?
Well, perhaps when the applicant provides their statement, they could clarify where that condensate may be pumped. I also don't understand exactly how much we're talking about. These are larger units, but typically a typical house, we're not talking about a very large volume at all for condensate, but I don't know how that is impacted by the size of the units for the freezer and the refrigerator that we're talking about.
Arnie, could you go over the parking and this earlier site plan, the earlier drawing shows and maybe Russ can answer this, but looks like a driveway, and I don't think it's intended to be that, but
It's actually easiest seen in the upper left-hand portion of that large site plan that you have in front of you. I probably can't read my version of it, but it has in the upper left, if I'm not mistaken, on that page, there are calculations for parking spaces. And if I'm remembering correctly, there are 23 required according to the calculation and 24 provided.
Yes, that says that, yeah. And they're all marked or?
No, some of the ones that you see are in the gravelled area, so I do not believe that they have painted or markings. They're unmarked. And I think Russ has just put some markings on there to show how many spaces could be located in those areas that are unmarked.
Okay. And what about handicap? It shows one on the site plan here.
Mhm.
Those are, what, is that all that's required?
Correct. And if I'm not mistaken, those aren't currently marked. Maybe that's shown on the photograph and maybe that's a new item that will be marked.
And that's appropriately next to the ramp.
Mhm,
Oh, it's
correct.
wonderful to have a big site plan. You can read it.
As close to the door as possible.
Yeah, prefer large ones. I can print and then if you want when I make my submittal, that would be fine.
Yeah.
I can help. I'll do that.
Great. Any more questions for Arnie? All right. Is there an applicant statement?
Again, I don't think I have much to add. The parking spaces are not marked and really we probably won't unless we need to. There's plenty of room for parking down that right side and along the back as I show here. And these are just the 9x18 dimensions that make up a typical parking space, but they're not marked. The ones in front of the building are marked. And of course, the handicap space will be painted and will have a sign that indicates it's a handicap sign. For ADA compliance, you have to have one per 25 spaces, has to be handicapped. And of course, the first one has to be handicapped. So that's why there's one that we're showing. As far as the condensate, it's going to be a tiny amount of water. And I was just trying to figure out from Jay exactly where we're going to put it. And I still don't quite understand it, but it'll be a tiny amount and it will have to comply with what the comment says. So when we submit building plans that show the plumbing, will comply with that requirement. But as Chaz just said, on a summer day, you won't know it's there because it'll evaporate before you.
Is there a condensate requirement that you have to deal with for any business as air conditioning then? That they have to, is that the same kind of concern or is this because it's a freezer and it's going to be more substantial than it was noted here?
I can only say that the typical residential condenser doesn't crank I guess it's more the air handler side, doesn't crank out or create a whole bunch of condensate. And
Mine does.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
like
so-
3 gallons a day.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah,
summer.
that's right.
but there is a specific provision that the public works director pointed to about condensate can't go into the road, or can't go into an alleyway.
There will also be plumbing requirements to be worked out as far as grease traps. If you have any food preparation, you have to make sure you handle, they call it fog, fats, oils, and grease. And we'll be working on that as well.
In the back corner of the lot where there's parking spaces going perpendicular to each other, is there going to be some sort of way to make sure people don't?
I don't think
Park
they'll
each
actually
other in.
park.
Is that
either
an
way.
issue?
No, it would be if we marked them exactly like this. I don't foresee it being an issue, and I could clarify that. I was searching for enough spaces to be in excess of those required, so I could easily move those to the left as I show them. And I was looking at that myself just now. It would probably be smarter to show it that way.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Russ, what's the distance approximately between the wall, well, what'll be the fence, excuse me, and that parking? I guess what I'm looking at is there enough room for cars to get through there if people are parked? I'm assuming.
Yeah, so the area closest to that fence is not a parking space.
Okay.
That's an open area and at the left corner, as you look from the street, the left corner of that fence is actually the 4-foot opening where we actually get into that area. You can see it probably on the big plan, which you don't have anymore, but it says 4-foot opening there on the left side of the fence. So yeah, that area is open and will probably be taken by, if a box truck comes in to drop off and pick up stuff, that's where they would be loading and unloading.
Great. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.
All right, we invite.
I offered Chaz an opportunity to get up here and brag about this, and he doesn't want to. But not much of a bragger. I'm glad to see him coming.
Can you tell us, just out of curiosity, about how long until this could be open?
We're
That's the
shooting
plan.
for the end of February.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Wow. Okay.
Great. Invite the public up for public comment.
Hi, Shannon Spencer, 512 Taylor Street. I actually just have a question and I don't think I'm supposed to ask them, but I would be curious to know in the parking area, how pedestrians walk. Is there a safe way? Is there a sidewalk? I don't see one on the map that I have that I downloaded. But I just wanted to make note that it seems like it might be is there an exit or entrance to the building from the back for those people who are parked in the back? And if not, then is there some safe way for pedestrians to get into the building? Thanks.
Excellent question.
There's not just, well, we should have the applicant respond, but there's not really to be any access from the back of the building because it's down, it's more of a service area. So it's just, but there is no, there existing currently, there is no real sidewalk in front of the business. So, but am I correct? There's no, it's not going to be anything that's going to come in from the back?
There's nothing coming in from the back. There's a sidewalk across the whole front of the business. His ramp accesses from the side.
Okay.
But they would certainly, from the back, they would walk up to the front. As you say, it's a 1-story up. They would walk up the drive and then in through the straightened out part of the handicap ramp and then onto the front walk. There's not space there for a dedicated sidewalk and that travel way. So no, there's not a dedicated sidewalk.
I also don't recall any specific requirement in our zoning ordinance that says that there has to have a public or a pedestrian access through a parking lot. Certainly not in our zoning ordinance.
But there is a sidewalk along East Nelson. Yes.
Mhm. And I suspect that most of the folks that are going to be customers are going to be parking in the front, and perhaps it's more of the folks that work there in both of all the businesses that are there are going to be typically, I hope, directed to be parking in that lower back portion. That doesn't mean that a customer couldn't park back there if there's a overflow need. I would suspect that there wouldn't be too many people having to walk through that back parking lot to get up to the new market.
I actually have a question for the applicant. From the exit of Sheets in the right lane where you wait at the traffic light to either go straight or make a right onto Nelson, I've always noticed that there's a cut through that goes directly into the property. Is that going to stay there? And is that you guys like that and want that? And I mean, I guess I'm just trying to figure out if that's people have used that right turn to dodge a traffic light, or if it's
It's an odd spot and but that's the way it is. And I assume that the owner wants to keep that open.
okay.
We're using it and yeah, we'll plan on keeping it just like it is.
Okay. All right, further commission discussion and decision.
I can go ahead and just to promote, we can have the discussion, but I move to approve site plan number SP 2023-01 and find the submitted site plan to be in compliance with the zoning ordinance.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you very much. We appreciate you. And looking forward to that.
I'm excited to have you guys.
Run.
All right,
On.
moving to item C. Entrance corridor COA 2023-02, an application by Red Dowdle for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for Rockbridge Barbell at 150 Walker Street.
Red was located downtown and needed a larger space. He moved out to this location on East Nelson Street. And he's not here, so I'll just go ahead and say he got ahead of himself a little bit with their signage, as you can tell, because it's already up. Or at least the signage above the front door has already been installed. In the entrance corridor, we do have requirements, or in the zoning ordinance, we have requirements for signage and for both wall sign, window sign, and freestanding signs. With the exception of the request that he has for the existing sign, and you see on the photograph on page 2, in the door, the glass door towards the bottom, that RB for Rockbridge Barbell, he brought that with him from his downtown location. And by 0.14, it is slightly too large for a window sign, because the window sign is supposed to be 6 square feet and he's at 6.14. He's been made aware of that. And I think it's a wood sign, if I remember correctly. So hopefully he will trim it down so that it meets the 6 square feet. But other than that, the signs do meet the requirements for signage in the zoning ordinance. And I would point you again to the requirements, bottom of page 3 for signage. We have 1, 2, 3 criteria for signage. And staff would state that with the exception of the proposed window sign, the proposed improvements do meet zoning criteria. Happy to answer any questions.
So when you say he got ahead of himself, it wasn't with regard to the one that's above. I mean, this putting both of them up is getting ahead of yourself. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct. You should get approval before
Yeah,
installation.
okay, that's what you're talking about. And then the slight over that can be dressed. That's. Do we have to say that overtly?
It would be, perhaps the motion could include the approval as long as the window sign meets the 6 square foot requirement.
And Arnie, the sign above the window is already there, or that's not a Photoshop job?
What you see there is the sort of the Photoshop version, but then they changed the black to white and the white and the black, and then they went ahead and put it up. So what you see on page 2 is the actual. So the application did provide a graphic.
Oh, I see.
So in theory, that sign could be bigger. Is that right or
Mhm.
not?
They didn't quite utilize the full space, but maybe it's just because of the format or the,
No,
they just didn't go all the way to the ends. And we were a little bit confused because the application said sign to be painted in vinyl. So what that meant was in film that the existing sign had been white. So I believe the portions to the left and right of the Rockbridge Barbell sign on that wall sign were white, and they just painted over that black. And then the vinyl sign was placed on top, and the vinyl sign is the actual Rockbridge Barbell sign.
Great. So no, we do not have an applicant statement, but invite the public up for comment on this EC COA. All right, seeing none. Do we have any further commission discussion?
if I remember, this isn't the first time someone has gotten ahead of themselves. And it's tricky because we don't want to create onerous situations for business owners. On the other hand, what's the point of having these, reviewing these signs? So,
I mean, from an enforcement standpoint, does that make it more difficult for you? The fact that they put it up, and what if he says, okay, yeah, I'll do it, and just never does it? Do we have to give him a time certain, or and there's
I can go by and check. These don't happen that often. As far as the size of the window sign, if that's what you're referring to, I can certainly go out there and take the tape measure and make sure that it gets trimmed down appropriately. If it's a question more about, it's a problem when people put up signs beforehand. If this had been a really gaudy sign, you take your definition of gaudy, whatever that may be, and he had put it up and it didn't meet your requirements, or you didn't think it met the criteria that you have, you could easily tell them to remove that and come back with a different proposal.
yeah, but again, this is not going to reflect my feeling about this sign in particular, but when you look on page 2 of 4, I start to go, what's the point? Aesthetically, what's the point of this exercise that we go through? And I'm not.
Well, we could
picking on-
deny it and then you'd have to take it down.
No, I'm not
Really?
picking on this one. I'm going to why do we do this? Is it
Yeah.
that we want compatibility between signs, among signs, or we don't care? That's what I'm kind of asking a fundamental question about why do we go through this process?
We've had that.
Kind of gets to what Arnie said as far as gaudy, if it seems so out of place in style or color, then we might question it more. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
straightforward, yeah.
There was a sign like a year or two ago in a close by location that was a pretty gaudy sign, but we approved it because whatever, it's the business owner's choice, and
Yeah.
there's no design standards. It's not
Yeah.
nice, or it's just personal taste.
That's what we've had some discussions previously about, criteria number 1, each parcel shall have an overall sign plan which reflects a consistent style and specifies the size and color scheme for the proposed signs. But I cannot think of any parcel, particularly with multiple tenants, that we actually have a overall sign plan, so
Mhm.
each manager or property owner is allowing folks to come forward with whatever sign they want. So unfortunately, we don't have, and we cannot institute an overall sign plan for a property. So we do the best we can with the proposal against the criteria that we have existing, or we look into changing the criteria.
And not to get too far down this path and away from this, but so does the property owner usually tell businesses that you're in an entrance corridor and you have to get sign approval? Because that, to me, that's kind of a tricky thing.
I will say the property manager for this property has been pretty good about doing that. I've had good experiences with her.
Good.
This is getting back to what John said, this to get that close to be only 0.1 of a square foot above means you have to go out there with a ruler. And so even though it's the strict rule that is breaking, are we really, how tightly do we have to stick to the rule? I guess it's, do we want this person to trim off that bottom? Is it worth it for us? Or is it just like, it's in keeping with what we're generally doing? Unless, because you had to go out and measure this sign, right? To see what it
I'm
was.
okay with doing that.
Oh,
He gets paid for it.
Tape measure. I'll take that tape
Out of the
measure from him.
office.
but I mean, it is splitting hairs. it feels like.
Yeah.
We also cannot, and I don't think this is what you're asking, but we also cannot make the approval knowing that it's over. So
We have to.
yeah.
Yeah.
That goes to, a variance would go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, not be granted here.
And I guess the problem is now that we have to be very careful because we can say, in this case, it's all right, but that's a precedent. And all of a sudden that 6 foot becomes, 6 foot, it's 6.1 square feet, and then it gets bigger. Yeah. So
40 units become 60 units and things like that.
Yeah.
smart.
You guys are the ones who want to prolong the conversation. I move to approve the entrance Carter Certificate of Appropriateness application EC 2023-02 for new signage at 150 Walker Street as proposed by the applicant with the provision that the window sign be reduced to 6 square feet.
A second. Let me have that one because since I complained, endorse it. So.
All right, further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Love that. That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
Moving right along. We're going to move to item D. Zoning ordinance amendment 2023-01 annual for accessory dwelling units. Let's continue the discussion where we left off. We have some more planning commissioners here today. Arnie, what's our goal for the day?
I didn't know quite how much time we would have left over for this and for the follow-up discussion with the green infrastructure working group. How much time do you want to spend? You want to talk for 20 minutes on this, something like that?
Oh, I'm happy with that. Yeah, we're here for that.
I didn't provide you with a whole lot, a little bit of background information, and I was hoping that perhaps we could at least get through the purpose statement. So what is the intent of this? What is the intent of what we're trying to accomplish with accessory dwelling units and accessory structures? So if we could
Yeah.
perhaps get through that, and then the next time we'll go further along in this outline. So on page 41 of your report, just a little bit of background. Talks about considering a text amendment, and we have a strategy in the housing 1.2 from the comprehensive plan that directs us to review regulations allowing accessory dwelling units in separate structures in appropriate residential areas. So that's our direction. Currently, we have an accessory apartment definition, and it says that it's a residential use having the external appearance of a single family residence in which there's located a second dwelling unit that comprises no more than 25% of the gross floor area of the building, nor more than a total of 750 square feet. The current definition does not allow accessory dwelling units to be located in accessory structures that are detached from the main building. And the the purpose of the zoning text is to explore whether or not accessory dwelling units can be allowed in accessory structures. Thought perhaps that we could provide you with an outline so we have a good idea of where we're going. And that outline is on the next page. And the first part on the top says Article 11 use and design standards. That's already in the code. So that first sentence or 2 sentences are in, and then we have residential uses. And as it happens, accessory dwelling units will fall as number 1 right in front of chickens. Chickens is number 1 now, but they will get bumped to number 2. So there is this outline proposed for the purpose statement and then definitions and authorization of ADUs by zoning district. And that was pulled from that AARP model code that we have provided to you in the past as background information. Any questions on sort of background or where we're heading?
Arnie, one question. I brought this up last time because it struck me that when we do this, we're really we're trying to increase opportunities for accessory dwellings, whether they be inside an existing dwelling or on the parcel. So does this outline also cover what is going to be inside, or that's going to be separate for outside, a separate?
I envision one set of rules for accessory dwelling units to cover both inside and outside.
Okay.
So
Very
when
good.
we talk about the definition, maybe we keep that in mind, that it's intended to be for both
Okay. That's,
and for the rest of the discussion as well. But I really don't see the need to have 2 sets of use and design standards, and maybe even 2 different definitions and 2 different uses in the use matrix. I think this all falls under accessory dwelling units. And then if there's a need to distinguish between inside and out detached, then we do that within the use and design standards.
So I could see it being maybe a little easier to have them separate, just with the 25% of the house or whatever. Isn't that one of the current standard for the?
Correct. And that's all up for discussion.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
that can certainly change.
Are we also, is it on the table to merge accessory apartments into accessory dwelling units, or would we still want to maintain separate definitions for apartments and dwellings?
I think our accessory apartment definition is the accessory dwelling unit, not definition, but that's the use. And we can actually call it whatever you like. We recently had accessory apartment in the definition, accessory dwelling, I think, in the use matrix, and almost got caught up with that Board of Zoning Appeals thing. So we quickly changed it to make it at least consistent. But I don't think it matters if you want to call it accessory apartments or if you want to call it accessory dwelling unit. I think in Alisan Tumbarge's report, I think the majority of them were accessory apartments, but I have to go back and take a look just from the other jurisdictions that have accessory dwelling unit ordinances or that allowance. I think most of them were called accessory apartments, but again, that's up to you on how you want to.
Arnie, do we have an idea currently how many accessory apartments there are? You know, 'cause, I mean, I knew, for instance, there used to be one, I think, across the street from me in Shannon's house, and Pat Merritt said that before they got it, there was a third floor. I'm just wondering how many, and do they have to be registered as such, or?
Sometimes when we have a request, sometimes I can go back and look when we have a request or a parcel changes hands. And I'm thinking about the parcel right now at 5, I think it's 15 and 17 South Main Street on the corner with Edmondson. There was a question with how long has that apartment been in the basement?
Mhm.
So I was able to check with Karen Roundy on the property card, and there was a note from years and years ago, I think prior to her even starting, because it wasn't in her handwriting, that said apartment in basement. So we may on the property cards have some idea, but there's no requirement to register them. Most of them, I suspect, have been, if they've been rented, not utilized for family purposes, but if they've been rented, they've been long-term, and we wouldn't know unless they're rented more recently as short-term rentals that there's an extra unit in the building. So there's no real way
Right.
that I'm aware of to tell.
There's no extra,
accurately.
there's no separate like taxing of them or anything like that, right?
Not
So,
that I'm aware
and
of.
one of the things we're going to want to talk about is the idea of how they're used, if they're short-term rentals and long-term rentals and all that. Okay.
Right. How many units can be on the property? How many long-term, how many short-term? We have R1 that allows duplexes. So are you an accessory for each of those, and what can be used short-term? But so there are some details to get to. Yes.
What about issues with building code? If they're an accessory dwelling unit, it seems, and they're going to be used as apartments, it would seem that they, and let's say it's inside somebody's house, it's kind of like what you're describing. And I'm renting it, doesn't there have to, isn't there a standard? I don't know.
Inside a building, if you were going to build a new duplex or if you have an old house and you want to create a new space within that for an accessory dwelling inside the main, you would have to meet building code. There will be separation requirements. In other words, the entryway. So if you're upstairs and you have to also get out because of a fire, you have to go down the set of stairs, and it has to be, what's the right word? It has to be protected enough so that you have the ability to get out. So that stairwell is going to have 2 layers of sheetrock, and the ceiling in the downstairs unit is going to have 2 layers of sheetrock so that there's a 1-hour fire rating. So there are some requirements there. And then if it's an accessory detached structure, then it's just going to have to meet all the building code requirements. It's going to have to be so many feet away minimum from the main, and there's setbacks and all those other things. We get a little bit more tricky when we're talking about a short-term rental, because there have been transient accommodation rule changes in the building code in the last go around, because they get updated every 3 years. And if it's a transient accommodation, then you have to put in a sprinkler system.
So like an Airbnb? Has
But the way our building official has interpreted that with this newer version of the code, that if you are a homeowner and you're in a residential area, you're the primary resident, you're there for most of the time, at least for all type A's, maybe not for some of the type B, then you don't have to put a sprinkler system in. But if you have a commercial zoning where there is no primary resident, it's just a unit treated like a hotel, people come and go, there's nobody there sort of observing or in control of the unit, then you have to put in a sprinkler system. And that can also be a domestic sprinkler. So what that means, it can be piped off the domestic system that you already have in your house, as opposed to putting in a new fire line and new fire meter and all that expense. So they can be a little bit cheaper than just, sprinkler system that you may be familiar with in a commercial building. But there are new requirements for transient accommodations. Specifically if, and at least in our interpretation, if they are separate and not part of another unit that has a primary resident. So the short answer is they all have to meet code. And I should have probably started with that.
So the code, though, is going to really be dependent upon how we define these things, what they have to meet. Is that, or is that?
No, we're going to be talking perhaps about square footage and other things. Maybe about if the property owner has to live there. But as far as pure construction, they're going to have to meet codes. I'm not sure that we're going to necessarily, and I'll have the building official review it when we get to a draft stage, a final draft, to see if there's anything in there that raises a red flag. But my presumption at this point is what we're going to be talking about detail wise will probably not have any impact on the requirements for building permits, that they're still going to have to meet those requirements.
No, I'm envisioning a situation where I build out a room in my house and I just, I have, my mother-in-law lived there for a year. Then she goes away, but then I decide to, and because I'm just building it for myself, for my family. And so it doesn't have to meet any code, but now I convert that into a Airbnb room. And now all of a sudden you kind of circumvent. When is it an accessory dwelling?
I'm not 100% sure about this, but my presumption is from what I do know about building code, if your mother-in-law lives with you and she has free reign of the house, just like you do, there's really nothing that needs to be done. But if you start carving out something that's more of a separate unit, separate entrance, separate cooking facilities, separate, bathroom and bedrooms, then now you're as a separate unit, and there's going to be requirements for life safety, for egress, and those types of things. And then another layer on top of that, if you're doing short term and you're planning on not being there, then there's a whole other level that's been added on about that sprinkler requirement.
I like the Bedford purpose. It's particularly the last sentence too, where it says trying to get previously established apartments.
I agree.
Bring that into this regulation too.
Yeah. Some areas don't have a purpose statement at all. And some of this is like sort of just like signaling, like we want to signal that we're open to new family structures and things like that. And do we have similar purpose statements in other areas of the code of like what we're trying to stimulate and encourage? I'm just curious because it's descriptive and good, but it's not necessary.
In our, sorry.
I would say it's not necessary, but I think it's also helpful to at least get this conversation going on figuring out where we want to go and sort of what the intent behind this is, just for our own purposes. And if we find out at the end that we really don't need a purpose statement, we can certainly get rid of it. And we can certainly at the end, it may change because of what we learn, and we may want to go back and change whatever we decide on.
When I was looking at them today and going back over that handout that we had, it's almost like the definition is more important
It is, right.
than purpose.
But I think didn't we do a purpose for the PDM?
That's what I was,
use? Yeah,
that's what
'cause-
I was thinking. Yeah.
And I find it helpful to say, why are we doing this, and-
Because it's like, these aren't really enforceable things.
Right,
Like
right.
you're saying, like, but so yeah. Well,
I will also say that sometimes when there's an enforcement action, that it's helpful to have that intent section, because if you can't quite tell if sometimes there's something in that intent statement that leads you to, no, it was meant to be this way and not the other way. So sometimes it is helpful.
And they recommend all the literature you were showing us, recommend doing it, recommend having that. So
And PDMU is just such a different type of zoning district. I think it's really valuable there. I was just trying to figure out in some of our other ones, just quickly. Chickens has a purpose statement.
We got to explain.
To meet the needs of the egg, of the new egg demands.
yeah, I know, but people are probably wishing they. and
But John's right. I think
Yeah.
the definition is,
yeah,
more important, but I think it is good to have the purpose.
Yeah.
I played around this afternoon before the meeting, just looking at these and doing a merge in a way. And I would leave it more to the wordsmiths, but just to throw this out as an idea. In Lexington, accessory dwellings are intended to provide additional housing options for the benefit and convenience of families and households with changing economic circumstances and or family structure. That kind of, is an opening. Furthermore, accessory dwellings are expected to increase housing opportunities for individuals who might have difficulty finding housing in Lexington. In addition, where appropriate, and that's where appropriate, these provisions are provided to recognize formally previously established, and that can be apartments that and provide for improved safety and physical appearance. Your sentence. So that was my just playing around with the different sentences we had in here.
it seems.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and they all kind of are saying similar things. Is there anything in any of these that anybody saw that they don't like? That's what I was wondering, because there's a lot of similarities and you're just in a way saying the same things in different ways, but is there anything?
Yeah, I like that. I think that we don't need to like list every single
Mhm.
example of
Yeah.
unique
I-
unique circumstances like
Right.
boomerang, the boomerang adult children. Look like a
Yeah.
little over the top, Waynesboro, but
Yeah.
Or make it sound like you're financially strapped and having to do
Yeah.
that. I thought that was a little weird in some of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost, some of them were too prescriptive and too.
that's what I was
too
sort of saying,
detailed.
like it's sort of signaling like we're trying to like increase this one demographic, but like really it's I like the way you worded it
Yeah.
though. It was less detailed and more just broad, like a
There's
big-
there it is, there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So that was written down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, I don't do it well on the fly. Like other members.
So that sentence, in addition to where appropriate, these provisions are provided to recognize formally previous established. So that sentence is just describing grandfathered in apartment or rooms or whatever that we're just now officially defining that used to not have a definition. What do you mean by recognize formally previously established? There's just a lot of adverbs in that sentence.
Yeah, and it can get,
Love
That's, I know that's copied right from Bedford, but I
Yeah.
just, what?
Is it to bring people out of the shadows and say, yeah, well, I have one of these and
Okay.
then to say, yeah, you're legit. This is all. And we don't want to make it too onerous or they won't come out and say, we have this.
Right. I
Is
think
that
it's
the-
that acknowledgement that we may have some and how are we going to treat them?
I got you. Okay.
And we would like also to make sure that they are up to code or are safe or whatever, right? That so that people are living in safe.
Right.
Like not in a basement where they'd have to crawl out a window to get out, that's sure.
Okay. I get it now. Thank you.
I think that's,
So that's what so I feel. Why don't we just pencil that in as a purpose and intent? We don't have, and then. We can tweak, take a word out or add a comma later, if we
Okay.
need to, but that's a good starter.
So John's first paragraph here, we'll punch that in.
the last one that's coming out of Strasbourg. There's things in there that I liked, like the mix of housing is a nice term.
Mhm.
And we're adding to a mix of housing, but I ran out of time. So,
Now, I wish I'd have provided you with definitions or something else to chew on as well, but that's not in your packet this evening.
Or there, what do you foresee? What will be the biggest challenges for us? Do you foresee in coming up with? Which of these will take the most work, do you think, or the potentially trickiest?
Not
Items.
even looking at the list necessarily. I think some of the tricky things that you might have to really think about, more so than others, would be property owners. Are they going to be required to be in one unit or the other? How to deal with buildings that are already in existence and they're non-conforming in some way, in setbacks or height or some other fashion. Sizes, lot size, sizes of structure, sizes of unit, size of lot, to see, are we going to pick a size of where you can't have one if it's below, if a lot size is below a certain amount. So, how equally are we going to treat this as far as lot size versus can everybody have one? And we were pretty straightforward with the chickens as an example, again, where everybody could have one regardless of lot size, or just as an example. So I think those are going to be, and parking is always an issue. Are we going to require off-street parking additionally for these units? Or if these units take up space that's already part of the off-street parking requirement, how are we going to handle that? There was actually, I can't remember which of the resources we gave you. If it goes into a garage, the garage isn't being utilized according to that survey by 70% of the people, because somebody went around and did a garage survey. So you're not really displacing parking spaces in garages where people have nothing but
Junk.
stored. So parking is going to be another issue.
You good?
Do accessory dwellings have to have their own post office box? I mean, how does that work? Because if they are really separate dwellings, do they have to have a different?
I suspect they're going to want a different address. And that gets handled through the 911 addressing system. And our point person is Thomas Wagner in Public Works. And then he runs it by police and fire to make sure that, because you absolutely want the EMS going to the correct address. If you're on a corner, is it the front or the side address, or the front or is it the back? So I would presume right now, yes, we're going to have new addresses for these units, particularly if they're set up as completely separate units.
Arnie, it was pretty late in the day and too late for today's discussion, but I sent you a PowerPoint and a link to a website for, looks like a very good presentation for all of us. The website even has the gentleman's presentation, but then there's also the PowerPoint. And it's kind of looking at ADUs in general, and then what are key issues and what are issues you should be thinking about. Glancing through it just before the meeting, it looked really good. So I've sent it to Arnie, and if you can forward it to the rest of the commission, I think it would be good background for those kinds of questions we're asking. Just a good resource to look at on your own time. You don't have to read it. You can look at it. You can.
Then another potential issue is going to be short-term rentals.
Mhm.
How are we going to handle those? How many, all that, because that's probably the biggest enforcement issue that I have that takes the most amount of time, is short-term rentals.
One of the things I wonder about, anytime we do new zoning, we have so many things that would be non-conforming, and you walk around this town that kind of develops so in such weird ways, and you realize, no, that wouldn't get, you couldn't do that today. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that. And you couldn't do that. And you couldn't do that. And you look at how many there are, and when we come up with some new zoning, the people who want to do something new, if the zoning is so different, much more restrictive, they might look and say, well, how come they're going to get to keep, why is it okay, for them, to be grandfathered? Like, who's that hurting? And so I wonder how we reconcile that, how we make it so that, because I think we want to encourage this, right? I think we want to try to get more housing options? How do we do it so that the new way doesn't become get out of control or too far out in terms of inconveniencing? Like, we have like garages that are just up on people's property lines, which you could never have now. And there might be, those are places where people might want to have one of these, and
Have the 1-story one and it's fine where it is, but does the 2-story that's still encroaching, is
Yeah.
that too much?
right.
Yeah.
And so how do we balance that? How do we make it flexible enough that, that we avoid any pitfalls while not making it too hard for someone who's going to do a new thing, something, as opposed to grandfathering in or whatever.
One of those AARP manuals, they were pretty liberal about their sort of implementation. We shouldn't limit ownership. We shouldn't limit this parking, because we should want as many as possible and the fewer restrictions that you have. But in the past, I've also recommended that taking an approach where maybe you have more regulations up front and then you see how it goes for a couple of years, and then maybe you don't require. Maybe at the beginning you do require the owner of the property to live in one of the 2 units, and then if you see in a couple of years that that's not an issue, then maybe you loosen it up. But it's hard to, once the cat's out the bag, it's hard to go backwards.
Mhm.
Because then you'd end up with more non-conforming ones than you want.
And you get into property rights and
Mhm.
there's some problems there. So maybe you do take a little bit more of a conservative approach on your start, knowing that you may not have as many units, taking that conservative approach.
And how many people have come to you? I mean, this is on, because people have come to you and saying, I would like to do this, I'd like to do that. How many, what would you say from your perspective is kind of the pent up demand, or how many people would jump on and say, boy, I would do this right away?
We had the 3 that's certainly in your background document. And I would say there's probably been another, maybe since I've been here in 6 years, a dozen
That's
that have
pretty significant in this
inquired.
town.
And I
Yeah.
can't say how many
Yeah.
of those are immediate.
Right.
Several of those are,
Yeah.
certainly. And yeah,
We did a lot of work and got 5 chicken permits.
I have news for you and later in the zoning report.
Okay.
You'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Um,
Don't want to give it away.
Yeah.
yeah, okay, I can't wait. I passed along a photograph that was sent to me. And then I'd like to give a copy of that to Arnie, so he has it.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is, okay, I was.
Yeah. What do we?
Yeah,
are
so
we looking at?
it's which one is the accessory dwelling?
I thought that was a chicken coop.
So.
Yeah. Right. Which is the
That's
accessory?
in Charlottesville and in a residential zone. It's a 3-story building with tiny windows.
Yes.
So the caution was you need to test your ordinance against the worst case, which is usually a developer buying a single family house as an LLC and adding a student apartment for 4 unrelated individuals, each with a car. So that's kind of. And I know we often get into that, like, well, so what's the worst thing that we're trying to protect against? So that's, as that podcast says, that's a cautionary tale.
So at your next meeting, we'll have the intent statement drafted up for you, and then we'll provide some options for definitions and getting through the rest. So maybe 3 or 4 of these items at each time. And we plan on pilfering heavily from the other ordinances that we already have. So the definitions I've already put together, have a handful of those from the other ordinances. And that maybe this could be sort of more of a menu item where we don't have to take too much time in deliberating them, because all this is pretty much baked into other ordinances.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I would love to. One reason we want to start with this purpose statement is because we really wanted to put it out there so that there's a good interface with the public to hear. We have our opinions of what it should be, but really in the end, we want to have this out there to make sure everybody is in the same ballpark with regard to what our purpose is, and then we can just fill out what the purpose is. So I don't know how to best do that. You make your intent statement, and then do we approve it? And then should we try and figure out how to circulate it? Or I'm not sure what you do.
We can wordsmith it a little bit more and then bring it back to you for a draft update, and then we can circulate that on the website
Yeah.
and make it available for folks, so that folks who are following along will have it readily accessible, that this is at least the intent statement drafted up thus far. I don't know how widely necessarily you,
I just don't I want this to be a statement that's in keeping with what the public wants. Cause that, it will be wasting our time otherwise, right? So,
and each time we bring this to you, it'll get filled out more and more, and the intent statement's gonna be at the front, so everybody will see it as we're going through. Who's interested?
But at one point, we might hit to Matt's point, we might hit a milestone where we have enough to kind of up the game in terms of making it known to people that we're
Yeah.
going to be discussing I don't know how to say it,
I
but
agree.
I don't know if piece by piece makes sense, because then you can get into deliberations without having the whole context together. But at some point, more than, because it's hard for anyone to follow this. It's hard enough for us to follow it after a year. You're going back. But anyway, I take your point, Matt, and I think we should try to find a good milestone along the way to open it up.
yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. It's. How long do you expect? Did we plan as a commission that this would take us, this project? It was, did we say this is gonna be?
Last meeting was agreed to no longer than the end of June.
Okay,
Would be nice.
Can do it.
It wasn't really agreed to, but it was sort of hinted at.
okay. Yeah, it's good.
We got, this list has what, 25 items. Do a couple of these at a time. Some of those items are shorter than others, and some like parking will take a while, but I like what you suggested, and I think we've all hinted at it, that instead of rewriting every single sentence, is sort of just taking a buffet of our favorite policies from different jurisdictions, and piecing it together that way, and then we can fine tune adverbs and setback density / area width, all those.
Tactical coherence.
The rise and the run, and making sure we know all the quantitative things later. All right. That sounds good. Can we close this item then?
Public comment?
Oh, thank you. Invite the public to come up. Discuss anything for item D. Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment, and we can close that item and move on to move to other business. Green Infrastructure Working Group final report and briefing note. John?
Pat and I'll do this one. I'll introduce the changes, and there aren't that many. On the briefing note, you'll see everything is the same except on page 4, which is page 47 of the packet. With the help of the Collective Impact Brain Trust, as I call them, we have a much better language on funding. That is improved over what was done before. And those are 3 paragraphs that have been reworked, and part of the reason for that was based on a comment received, just to clarify that in the second paragraph, that the model recognizes the city as a partner of special standing. So that kind of explains a little bit more about that. So that's the only change there. Everything else is the same.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
Editing? Just after you say collective impact and then model, can you just put in parentheses CI? Because then you use CI throughout afterwards.
Okay, I didn't do it. It's not there before, earlier in the
Is it?
document. Okay, Matt, we'll make sure that it's there.
It's in the first paragraph of the introduction.
Okay. Well, then I suggest you use it as CI instead of collective impacts below. So, okay, but yeah,
It sort of helps to remind what it is.
Okay, we'll add that in. Yep. You mean on, under the first paragraph
Cool.
on the funding?
not funny, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You want it after model or after impact?
Their impact.
After impact.
Okay. If there's no questions on that, then you have the full report. And again, there's not many changes except drawing some link to the briefing note. Based on the comments you all gave last time, it made sense not to try to rewrite the full report and integrate the briefing note, because the briefing note is fairly concise and covers everything. So the only changes in the report itself is on page 1 or page 54 of the packet, the executive summary and introduction. You'll see a third paragraph there. There are other examples of how the Lexington Community and Council come together to address opportunities and challenges. For example, 1996, Historic Lexington Foundation was founded. And then we mentioned Main Street. And then the point, since their founding, both organizations have significantly contributed to Lexington, raised external financial resources and mobilized community support. So it's that's that addition. On page 4 of the report, which is page 57 of your packet. There is an additional section called process there. And well, it's not that, what's the addition is the second paragraph. Just to say what the Planning Commission's role review process was. So just to highlight that and put it in there. And that ties that paragraph ties back to the briefing note. And it does have CI in parentheses. Good. An additional paragraph on page 6 of under initiatives. You'll remember the last paragraph, while the comprehensive plan is a statutory document required by Virginia, this report is non-statutory. It's a roadmap. That's language we used in the introduction to the first time. So just to clarify that. Then we added the News Gazette editorial as an annex. And then there is a short history of the green infrastructure in Lexington Comprehensive Plan on Annex 9. And that's it takes it back to and actually I borrowed some language from Pat's summary of the comprehensive plan. And it just shows it goes back to the 2007 plan. And then how it came out of Planning Commission as a catalyst project. So that's just to put that in context. And then we removed there was a former annex on funding opportunities. Took it out because there's a link to that Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation site, which would be updated anyway on a quarterly basis. So it would be out of. So those are the only changes. So if you all are happy with that, then Pat, do you want to?
Yes, I think now we're at the next steps part of this, which is page 5, page 48 of the overall packet, I think is where we are from the executive summary there. What we're doing the first part in there now, reviewing and forwarding the green infrastructure working group's report. And for their consideration. And then the idea is that we want to decide how do we want to interact with city council on this? And so maybe Leslie will have some good ideas on how we want to do this, how we forward this for council's consideration and talk to them about it. And then also getting a motion, and John has, I think, a pretty good proposed motion for what we can kind of put a bow on it for planning commission and send it forward. So we had talked about before, maybe trying to have a joint work session with city council after they've had a chance to read through all of this. Does that seem like the way to go, or just have it as an item on a city council agenda on a regular meeting? What do you think, Leslie?
Either way, I mean, people will have questions, so, right, either if you want to present it, but we do try to meet with city council anyway, so if we have anything else to talk about, though this will take up most of the time. I don't know, I think I guess it's really up to the mayor to
Right,
decide, but I think
right.
a work session would be nice to cover it.
Right, okay. Would that, when you have a work session, is anybody else invited to speak? Would we, or is that like just by rule, no, it would only be us and them? Or if we wanted to say have someone who's been involved in this, speak to any points?
Oh, anybody could, oh, yes, anybody who participated could speak. We don't usually have public
Right,
comment.
but
So if you did want public comment, then we could do it during the regular meeting,
Right.
though we have on occasion allowed public comment in our work sessions, but
Right.
that's not typical.
that's all right. But if we wanted to have someone there with us from the group.
Oh,
is what we're
yeah,
trying to
right.
say.
You could invite the whole group or.
Okay,
Quick question for Arnie. Did we already tentatively want to have a work session with city council for accessory dwelling units in the next 6 months? Or is that not part of that we weren't going to be doing that?
Not that I'm aware of. We had talked quickly or briefly about a joint work session in January regarding PDMU, but we couldn't find a time for that to work.
Mm.
So the PDMU is going to be on council's agenda for their next Thursday's meeting.
That's fine. I was just curious if we already had scheduled work sessions, but I like the idea of some sort of work session with the council.
Just a little bit of a note, we are getting into budget season, so it's going to be difficult the next few months perhaps to get a joint or a work session scheduled potentially.
Yeah, and that's a good
Not
point,
impossible, but
right.
it's going to be harder.
Which may, yeah, again, it'll be up to the mayor, but
Okay.
then maybe it's at the beginning of a meeting, and
Mm.
we've been taking 30 minutes to an hour with presentations. This could be the presentation at the beginning of a meeting. Yeah. Again, it's up to him to decide, but
okay,
I think whatever the format, there should be discussion there will be discussion back and forth, and
Okay.
you can have
Mhm.
as many people from the team participate as you want.
okay.
I like the idea of work session just because it creates, the one thing I've been worried about on this, the gravitas of having this that's the whole point,
Mhm.
as opposed to having then a city council meeting after
Right.
that. So.
Right. Yeah, so if would you recommend that, Leslie, to the mayor, that we have a work session, and we'd prefer that?
Okay.
If it works for their scheduling, for your scheduling?
That sounds good. Yeah. And I've given them the heads up
Okay.
on that, but
Okay. We don't need to, John, get into the business of the name. Is that going to be something that's going to get
No,
into
I
once
think
it's,
that's a-
okay?
yeah.
And I
Noted
saw
on that.
comments on that, and, okay. And then I think is it just a question of the motion, John? Is that the last thing we really need to do with this now?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
If you will.
Okay.
Would somebody like to?
Didn't John have a motion?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's somebody has to say it.
Someone has to say it.
It's on page 5.
Page 5,
or
page 48.
page
48
40
overall.
48, Matt. Yeah, Matt, you make the motion.
Page 48. Like getting all the kids in class on the same page in the textbook. What page was that?
I was in a different place. I was looking at the annexes. And it's just, this is beautifully done. It's really nicely presented. It's really attractive. Is this gonna live on the website, on the city's website? Is that the idea?
Certainly can.
Should. Yeah.
Yeah, it should.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So. Right, I have to read this whole thing. To achieve the goal, objectives and strategies established in the green infrastructure chapter of the 2040 Lexington Comprehensive Plan, the Planning Commission endorses the Green Infrastructure Working Group report. Getting greener in Lexington, moving the conversation forward. The commission concurs with the report's proposal to consider the collective impact model approach. And we encourage the city staff to review and report to identify opportunities to integrate green infrastructure initiatives into ongoing work plans.
Second,
All in favor?
Are we gonna have a discussion?
We can, I thought we all
He's
agreed.
kidding. I think he's kidding. He's kidding.
Dang it.
Any further discussion for Matt? In case he wasn't sure after that, reading that motion. All in favor?
aye.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Green Infrastructure Working Group. This is a great document. I concur with Matt.
It's just,
Should feel very proud of that and look forward to it being a fabric of the way the city thinks and grows in the future. All right. Let's go to zoning and planning report.
Met 3 times with the Spotswood parcel developer and his architect and 2 of the city council members. And sorry if I'm stealing thunder here regarding the design of the multifamily building on the Spotswood parcel. And it will be their conditional use permit was deferred or postponed till the meeting on February 2nd, but it's going to be further postponed until the first meeting in March for city council's review and approval. Approved the 8th chicken permit this week.
8.
8. There were none last year, but first one came in this year, and that's number 8. Cannot say that all the other ones that have been approved are still having chickens or not, but we have at least approved 8 permits.
That's not 8th this year. That's 8 in
8
total.
total.
So do you think people have chickens and just don't know to get a permit or?
I do not know. Yeah, but now that we have the process and it's a $25 fee, it's not
it-
onerous. So I would hope
is it-
people that have them are coming in.
Is it public record who has submitted permits for him? So like it's okay. Cause yeah. All right, cool. That's great. No,
What do you want to tell us?
nothing personally.
Any admissions?
I just know somebody and I'm just like, they the type of people that would go,
There was one approved across the street from you a year and a half or so ago.
thank you. I love it. We watch them when our neighbors are gone and we get an egg or 2 out of the deal. So it works out. I'm glad that they're above the table. So
I also attended the Rockbridge Highlands Realtors Association luncheon and gave a presentation on short-term rentals. They had invited my counterpart from the county and from BV, and the counterpart from BV didn't show up, but so there was a quick presentation on some land use issues, most specifically about short-term rentals. Which leads me to another item. There's a House Bill 2271 that's been proposed. And what it allows is a complete and utter exemption for Virginia realtors to any and all of the short-term rental rules and regulations.
So why?
So our short-term rental rules and regulations, the realtors think that they should be exempt from those, and they propose legislation. And it's a House bill, and I think there's also a companion Senate bill. And I don't have it in front of me, but it really exempts them from all rules and regulations that have to do with having a primary resident there, having the maximum number of days, and it goes on. There's a long list. So for some reason, they feel that they should be exempted from short-term rental rules.
And that's if the realtors manage the property.
I see. Okay, that's what I was wondering what that
Right.
meant. So if the realtors are the property managers, they shouldn't have to.
And if you're a property owner and all of a sudden you have to abide by rules and regulations, why would you not go get a realtor so that you wouldn't have a maximum number of days or
Right.
so it's going to drive investment, I think, and we're going to lose a number of housing units if this gets approved.
Do we know if this was introduced by a Republican or Democrats? And
Somebody out of Danville, but I do not know.
And it's backed by the Realtors Association.
so that means everyone will
What-
want to be on board with it in the.
Well, not necessarily that. I mean, we went and talked to our legislators and Cree and to Ellen Campbell and told them our concerns, and they seem very receptive. But the Realtors lobby has been very strong.
Mhm.
But also, I talk to your local realtors, because this is not necessarily good for a realtor either. I mean, I think when I talk to realtors one-on-one, they realize it's hard to sell your property sometimes. If you had a short-term rental that was a continuous short-term rental, a commercial operation, basically, they seem to realize that's not a good thing for a neighborhood, yet they propose stuff like this. I don't understand.
And we worked really hard on it.
Mhm. Part of local control that's sort of maddening. If you work that
Yeah,
hard,
that's
you have
right.
so much public input, and then just by a fell swoop of legislation from Richmond, somebody, a special interest groups gets exempted from those rules.
Mhm.
It's not easy to swallow. The last thing is I attended a tree board meeting as well, my first tree board meeting.
What's going on there?
They had Sandra Stewart in attendance, and she was willing to write some grants. So there's a good bit of talk about grant writing.
Thank you, Arnie. Any catalyst projects we want to discuss? No, we can, at this point, the green infrastructure group. This report is going on. Is the planning commission's, we're still gonna have it. We'll still, I guess, have the discussion with city council, but would this still be a catalyst project?
Yeah, but I think we can put complete.
Yeah.
At the end of it.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Is there any value? I'm just going to ask if to keep those there on the agenda, since
It's just, for me, it's just
Is
a
it
reminder
helpful?
of like, if there's anything new to report in there, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of one of those things where
up
as
to you.
long as there's nothing like really pertinent.
And I do think the assessed stormwater fees, that's going to happen this coming year.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine leaving it unless, we're losing, we need to recover more space in our agenda. Key annual PC milestones. We know what we're doing right now. And anything else? All right, how about a city council report?
I don't really have one. The main news, Arnie covered that, which was good. And I did, in your conversation from last meeting, you were talking about is city council on board with the accessory dwelling? And they are, it was a catalyst project, so they knew about it. And then we had our retreat a couple of weeks ago, and I brought it up again, just told them it was on our agenda to make sure everybody had buy-in as far as they felt that was a good thing for planning commission to work on, and I got all thumbs up. So
Good,
thank you for your work.
good to hear. Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. Any other items? Are we ready to call it?
I just want to say thanks, Kate and Arnie, as usual. I mean, these packets are huge and complicated, and they're great. And so thank you for providing all this information.
Sorry if it scares you if it shows up as 94 pages.
Right, right. I check before I say, I'm gonna print this and read it out on paper. So
And
but it's,
the real compliment is the fact that people who weren't at the meeting had a good sense of what went on there. And that's the real key. That's the point of this. And we appreciate that.
I've asked if the it's now normal. They all do it for me, but I'll ask for a printout ahead of time, especially for a big one. And so then that's my copy, you know, so it makes it,
If anyone ever wants.
Yeah.
then they contact.
yeah, because sometimes it's easier to read the printed.
Excellent. I make a motion to adjourn.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
I think we're gonna need to have recess.